I'm refreshed for the next round. And I haven't even gotten to Jeremy Pitt yet. So that's sort of the whole framing for the sociotechnical cyberphysical system. But before I get on to the next level, I do want to mention I just happened to look up the Liquid Robotics website because, again, they're now owned by Boeing. Again, defense contracting. But Liquid Robotics was the ocean drone, that wave glider. And, back when I had this email with Mary Holland, she said, Allison, as I wrote to you earlier this week, Robert has not had anything to do with Vantage Point for many years, and he has asked to be taken off their website. Well, that hasn't happened. I can't find him there now. Well, Mary, all you do is you Google RFK Jr. and Vantage Point Capital and comes up, but copyright 2023. Thanks for pointing out his name was still there. His sole investment through Vantage Point. Now, that is not accurate because he was clearly a lead on like the Bright Source solar project. Was a self-propelled surfboard sent into the ocean to check salinity. And he was previously headed water keepers, and he cared about water. So that was his interest in protecting the oceans. So Mary's trying to pitch me on that the self-prepared surfboard. Well, that's the Liquid Robotics wave glider. And here on the Boeing website, it says they operate individually or in fleets. To enable a network of sensors for monitoring and data collection. So essentially, the surfboard that she was pitching me on is an ocean drone. And it's not just an individual drone, but it's a network drone, a network of sensors for the ocean. So it's like the internet of the ocean, right? And so just what they're trying to do in Maui with the JumpSmart Smart Cities, they're also trying to do to the oceans as well. And the mission of the wave glider, the first thing listed was defense. Anti-submarine warfare, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and other military applications. And then it talks about maritime border protection. And then at the bottom, it has environmental assessment, right? So Mary's leading with the benign, we're just checking water salinity, right? But it's a military project. Like RFK Jr.'s was advancing military project. So that I just want to emphasize that Liquid Robotics here, when I decided to look it up, because I hadn't, I'm like, I wonder if they're in Hawaii. Wouldn't that be interesting? Well, yes, they are. So it says, I don't know if it's their only base, but their main base is in Hawaii. It says, look, and there are all the children. They're acclimatizing all the children, including maybe indigenous children, to the military drone project. Hawaii support operations for Liquid Robotics, now a Boeing company. The Liquid Robotics Support Operations Test and Evaluation Facility in Kauai, Hawaii, is the main hub for wave glider development, ocean testing, and regional operations, as well as the birthplace of the wave glider. So yes, the ocean drone is homegrown native Hawaiian project, military project. And again, they're meshing it with the traditional lifestyles of the Hawaiian people and their communities. And, so bad what they're doing. I'll just read, this is their community building blurb. Known for its beautiful white sandy beaches and coral reefs, West Hawaii is now threatened by climate change, droughts, fires, invasive species, and human impact. The impact on our ocean and coastal community has led to West Hawaii being classified as an endangered ecosystem zone. The traditional life ways of Native Hawaiians in our community, such as fishing, harvesting limu, seaweed, and salt making, have been disrupted, and thus local economic fabric of our community has changed from being one of subsistence living to dependence on importing 90% of our food, right? And so essentially they're going to be pitching the ocean drones as a sustainability venture, but even all you have to do is go over to the Boeing website and see that the primary use, the first initial use case, is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And that's all the stuff that they use against indigenous people since forever. So there you go. That is about narrative management. Okay, so here I'm going to talk a little bit about Jeremy Pitt. He's in this map that I've showed a couple times. He authored a chapter in the book From Bitcoin to Burning Man, which came out in 2014. And I think John Clippinger was the co-editor, and I'm trying to remember the other co-editor. He works on cooperatives and now is at the Schumacher Center in Great Barrington. And so Jeremy Pitt's chapter was on algorithmic governance of common pool resources. And that's actually a lot of what like Protocol Labs does. And was it David Dalrymple, about digital public goods, right? Allocating the proper allocation of digital public goods. All of these new funding mechanisms for digital public goods and voting and getting signals on all of that. So that's what Jeremy Pitt's program was about. He also was part of this Democracy by Design platform using tokens for social coordination, modeling it on the Athenian city-state. And again, his collaborator on that is Josiah Ober, a classicist at Stanford. And he posits about Athens, the Athenian city-state, as being an evolutionary leap in the original superorganism. The co-author of the chapter, her name is Ada Diaconescu, and she is an engineer with a specialization in belief networks, automata, embedded systems, home automation, and she used to work at Orange Labs in Paris, which is all about digital ID and cyberphysical systems and access. And let's see, I guess she was involved with something about knowledge management for democratic governance. So again, the voting is another signal for coordination besides the money. So here we've got, I'm not sure, it's not. Oh, that's right, sorry. So here we have Jeremy Pitt. He is with Imperial College of London, and he is the deputy head of intelligence systems and network groups. So I think the networked thing, we have to understand that as complexity and emergence. He's affiliated with the Artificial Intelligence Network, the Center for Cryptocurrency Research and Engineering. Okay, so he's the crypto guy. Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering, Intelligence Systems and Networks. He has been involved in a lot of different projects, including effective computing, including, let's see, the project manager of AlphaByte, and the FIPA Agent Standardization Initiative. He's working on research collaborations with people in India and Japan. So he's working on AI and human-computer interaction, but again, not just like you and a robot, but you and the outside-in robot, which could be your whole house or your whole city, inclusive of other human participants, other human agents. So the Imperial College of London, these are some other things from Little Sis that I had put in some of their other programs. Again, universities are big places, but they are subunits of Imperial College London is the Imperial Network for Vaccine Research, the Translation and Innovation Hub, the NHS Healthcare Trust, the Enterprise Division. A lot of this is tech transfer. That happens through their White City campus. Department of Infectious Disease, Institute of Biomedical Engineering, Future Vaccine Manufacturing Hub. And then this was interesting to me, the Policy Innovation Research Unit. And they were working on advancing pay for success finance. And they're also a member of the Convergence Alliance. So yeah, noosphere, here we come. So that's Jeremy Pitt. Now, when I saw this image, the image of the JumpSmart Maui, it exactly reminded me of this community energy system here, the smart house, the smart village, the national grid. And this is a presentation that Jeremy gave to, I think, Katia Michael at Arizona State University about, it was related to his book about sort of cyber anarchism and socialism or something like that. I have the book over there, but in that they're talking about coordination and these smart villages. So I'll play that. But to me, I had included this in one of my other maps. This is situated around McNamara, and who was connected to the World Bank and led, in the U.S. and Vietnam. And oh no, it wasn't that one. It's this one. Yeah, Robert McNamara here, in the U.S. Air Force, worked at Ford, and was Secretary of Defense during Vietnam, and then right after that became head of the World Bank. And he was a management consultant at Ford initially. And so I really think that Vietnam, there are all of these backstories to what was happening in Vietnam, but it was the earliest deployment of some of this remote sensing technology, the Internet of Things. Operation Igloo White, they were using remote sensing tech in 1966. Now, these were big things like the size of baseball bats, and they would throw them out of the air. They had like a sharp stick on the end, and so they would hope that the sensor would land the right way in the dirt and stand up and transmit. But now we've got like the nanodust, right? Like the sensors that are just so tiny. But Operation Igloo White was much more macro, but that was an early implementation. And then I found a 1962 report from RAND about this Strategic Hamlet Initiative. And so again, the biggest issue with Vietnam, and this is, oh gosh, what is her name? Oh gosh, I'm forgetting her name. I feel so bad. It was like the Indigenous Peoples History of the U.S. And she was talking about Vietnam really representing, again, Indigenous people, like asymmetrical warfare and versus a more structured approach. And so the farmers who were towards North Vietnamese, that they didn't want them there, and so they would relocate them to these strategic hamlets. And then those strategic hamlets became test beds for behavioral science. And so they actually had to build their strategic hamlet. And then like once they were in it, they were monitored and watched in terms of how to use propaganda to steer communities towards the U.S. interests in that engagement. So it was very interesting. RAND put a lot of resources into looking at those villages and how they were involved in social reorganization. And actually, they called it a pacification measurement. So they were trying to figure out about measuring the impact, how to pacify these communities. Now, again, when we go back to think about sustainability, McNamara with the World Bank, he was the one who did a lot of the early loans to the Global South for quote unquote welfare projects, but those investments crippled them economically and then put them in line for structural adjustment to have further control of the countries. And one of the people who influenced him greatly, who was also an advisor to JFK and LBJ, was Barbara Ward Jackson, who is called the godmother of sustainable development. She's British. I think one parent was Quaker, one parent was Catholic. She was also very influential in Canada, and Maurice Strong. They worked together very closely. And so she was setting up sustainability behind the scenes, but the sustainability is really sustainability tied to social impact and surveillance networks and game mechanics, and the protocol layer is really the cybernetic infrastructure for the matrix, really. And so she was behind that as well. But I want to mention again, in terms of indigenous resistance, the issue of the Strategic Hamlet Project and where that fits in. And then I do have here's one of the images of the covers, Vietnam Strategic Hamlets. And, I put this in a different section about like slime mold being a collective sacrifice zone, and this behavioral data as a totalitarian tool. Now, I'm rethinking that whole totalitarian authoritarian, because I know what they want is the wisdom of the crowd. So you can't actually have total control. You need to have some choice architecture built in, or it's not interesting to the programming. But in this strategic hamlet and the behavioral design, I think it has a lot to do with social programming and cellular automata. So let me play this clip with Jeremy Pitt talking about the smart villages. And again, just for reference, we're looking at this in the context of the Maui JumpSmart community system that was the partnership between the US and Japan.
The rate of change is actually outstripping the rate at which the sociologists can understand these changes. So the idea, of course, is that you you actually form a community. You team up with other smart houses to form a smart village, and you either buy or sell energy, or you lend or borrow energy amongst yourselves. But even then, with a smart village of this kind, you might see daily or even yearly fluctuations. So what do? Well, you get together with other villages and you form a smart town, and at some point you actually connect yourselves to your national grid.
Now, I will point out he talks about sharing energy, but if it's dependent on environmental conditions and you're in a smart village, if it's a cloudy day, it's a cloudy day for everyone. So no one's going to have energy to exchange. If it's a day with no wind, nobody's wind turbines are going to be blowing. So this idea that somehow your neighbor is going to have more energy than you do if you're in the same geography doesn't actually make any sense.
So to make up any shortfall or to sell any excess. Or you could actually interact with them and get them to decide what needs to be turned off in such a way. And so now we actually have humans in the loop because we really have a partnership between our computational and human intelligence.
Now remember, that signaling, that's the data that is most interesting, is you deciding what turns on and what turns off, right? And collectively, and the patterns, that's what they're interested in.
So how are we going to solve it? Well, here it is. Here's the solution. It's self-organizing multi-agent systems.
Now that's the superorganism, self-organizing multi-agent system. So that's the same as the body. We're thinking fractal. So self-organizing would be cells that organize into tissues and organs and bodies. And so that nested nature is what they're talking about at a social level, only instead of us being in a village or being connected to a national grid, the idea is ultimately that we become part of this noosphere, right? This global thought form that's connected through electrical signaling and circuitry and smart contract logic and energetics, right? The circuits.
Look upon these situations as involving a set of autonomous and heterogeneous peers.
Now, autonomous peers, that's where you get the languaging around entrepreneur. That's where you get the languaging around sovereignty, right? They need for us to imagine that we are individual agents in this emergent system and that we don't already have our connectivity, like our relational connectivity or our economic connectivity, that we are somehow units in the computation. I think understanding that language is important because for the most part, when people hear sovereign or, autonomous or freedom, they have a certain way of imagining it, the way we've commonly understood it. But there is this other piece that's being set up for the agency, to give you agency, but in the game board that they've designed.
Whether they're human or computational intelligence. And they have to interact in such a way as to solve a collective action problem.
So that's what I mean by the human computation, a collective action problem. Now, I don't know what the task list is on the collective action problems, but this global network superintelligence, there's some collective action problem that we're supposed to participate in. And for the most part, I feel like the interface that we engage with isn't all that's there. Like, we're engaging with something and we see one layer of it, but there's a lot of layers behind and we don't understand what's going on in the layers behind, which is problematic.
These kinds of social dilemmas have been hugely just studied in philosophy and economics under the umbrella of game theory, the science of strategic interaction, if you like.
So again, game theory is really what we were busy with all during the Cold War. And I think that was the main point of the Cold War, was to weaponize space, get the sensor networks together to get the intelligence and the surveillance, and then dial in on the game mechanics and the prediction modeling.
It is given that you model the people involved in these situations as players, there are a set of actions that are available to them and a set of outcomes that will happen depending on what choices each player makes.
So he just says exactly what I've been saying is like, and I listened to this before, but I didn't have the underpinning to really get it. Like, I kind of got it, but I'm getting it with much more clarity now, is that there's choice theory built in, and the choice theory is important to the computational purpose. The collective action problem cannot be solved if everyone is restricted to a one single choice that was decided outside of them. They have to actually have choice to have the interconnectivity, to have the computation happen. So that agency is actually key. Now, it's not total agency. You can't just do whatever you want. You have to sit on their game board, and the choices are going to be a palette of choices that they give you. But he just said, yeah, solving the collective action problem. Okay, so, and then this is the other one. Okay, so this is about encoding social rules into the system, right? It's not enough that we have rules that we just understand. They have to be coded and enforced and machine readable.
This is what we might call sustainability design. By design, did this was to actually make up some rules where people voluntarily agreed to abide by in order to maintain the system. We shouldn't trust to luck to come up with the rules. We should actually design our institutions such that they have these properties right from the start. If you're going to go to...
And that's the smart contract layer, is you create values and then you build them in code. And so when we hear about things like the moral economy or well-being and human flourishing, that's the idea that we will quantify that as some sort of algorithmic recipe and then put it into the smart contract layer for to have it be enforced by the sensor network.
Cyberphysical system where you've got a whole bunch of agents involved in this. Yeah,
that would be your small village, right? That would be the Maui, the 30 families that were the pilots for the JumpSmart Maui. Those are the agents.
Rather than allowing them to try and evolve a set of rules or appeal to these principles, why don't we turn the principles actually into code so that the agents are running by these codes? The
agents are run by the codes. Now, the agents, again, could be your smart refrigerator, your smart car, your smart sprinkler system. Like, you can be an agent and there are agents. So everything is just an agent in this scenario. There's nothing like a soul. You have a soul. Something else doesn't have a soul. Like, no, everything is just a series of agents.
But self-modifying code, if you like, so the agents can actually modify them while this is running.
So the self-modifying, I think that's an evolutionary aspect. There's a fitness, an optimization, and then the self-modifying is to achieve a certain optimization metric, and then that would be the evolution process of whatever the social system is.
And we actually showed that sensor networks, for example, or ad hoc networks, where you've got to pool some common pool resources like battery power, bandwidth.
Again, battery power. So think about it. The common pool resource includes the battery power. And so what does Vantage Point invest in? Batteries. What are we go over in
storage and so on. Yeah? You could actually...
I just want to go over to the smart village again. So they're talking about batteries as being common pool resources. So in my mind, this is like metabolism. The batteries are part of the metabolic state. So once we understand that what this is about is homeostasis and managing energy as a metabolism at a global scale, that managing a common pool resource would be like a cell functioning, managing its own biology to be sustainable within an energy construct. And then the trading of things, the trading off of tokens or what have you, votes to manage the common pool resource, which again, the common pool resource would be within the limits of a cell, within the limits of a whole body, within the limits of a neighborhood, a city, a nation, a globe. Like it just scales all the way up, to outer space, the homeostasis of the galaxies or, whatever. that those exchanges are the signaling, and that's the signaling that's going to be coordinated. And that's why Hawaii is so important, because it's a center of signals intelligence, military signals intelligence, and encryption and decryption. That's really important because, again, all of this stuff is happening. This information is being transmitted. Most of us have no clue what it is even about, or don't even maybe care what it's about. But some of us do, and then we actually need to know what to do with the information and how to access it and make meaning out of it.
Sustain these when all of these principles were in place. This is what we might call sustainable.
Okay, so sustainable social goals. So that's that. Let me see. Okay, so we've got all of that covered. Okay, so this is a map that I had made. Leo and Jason and I talked about this. This is a lot of clips from Protocol Labs. And here you can see the digital public goods. A New America. There's Tamika Tilleman, who is the co-keynote at the Mormon Transhumanist Blockchain Conference. He's there with New America launching a digital decade to strengthen public institutions. So that's the digital goods. And Protocol Labs is working on that. David Dalrymple is the retrospective funding of digital public goods. It's interesting, a lot of the Center for Digital Public Goods is out of Norway. A lot of the Scandinavian countries are really deeply embedded in this. And there's part of me that just feels like, since all of this is about energetics and circuits, the Scandinavian countries are very close to the poles, like the magnetism. I feel like there's something about Norway that may have something to do with like electromagnetism, and that's why they're doing some of the public goods. That's just my intuition. And again, like the Philip Pullman books, The Golden Compass, a lot of that action takes place up in the Arctic Circle and the Aurora Borealis. There's Svalbard is in that book. And then Julian Huxley went up to Svalbard at some point. So I feel like digital public goods in Norway is sort of important. And even just revisiting this, like looking at Giveth, that was tokenized charity. Again, that's another kind of signal. So this is about like pulling civil society into the token engineering towards complexity and emergence. And here I have over here just like Santa Fe Institute talking about all of that complexity theory and evolutionary algorithms. And this is the book, From Bitcoin to Burning Man and Beyond. David Bollier and John Clippinger. So they were the editors. I would really recommend the table of contents just kind of lays it out. This is from 2014. I talked about this a little bit with Jason and Brandy previously. Internet of Money, community currencies, working in Africa. There's Ledgard. He wants to give the giraffes wallets, digital wallets. Then in the nature of money, green coins, and then here's Pitts and Diaconescu, the algorithmic governance of protocol common pool resources. So I would say the common pool is the game board. And I pulled a few things from this chapter, their chapter 12. Their chapter talks about sociologically inspired computing. And so what I would say is we need to mix the sociology with the biophysics. And that's the crux. I think the social scientists don't know about the biophysics, and the biophysics don't know about the social scientists, but they're both going in the same direction. You'll be hearing lots and lots and lots about Elinor Ostrom and the tragedy of the commons, and how we all have to get together to manage the commons, which really means that we all have to be agents on the protocol layer game board. How do people collectively allocate shared common pool resources, and what should the allocation be? And so this also has a lot to do with cooperation and cooperatives. Now, I'm not against cooperating. I think we should be definitely cooperating, but cooperation within a sensor network to inform a larger AI pattern recognition for some other purpose we don't quite understand, I think that's problematic. So tragedy of the commons. So here we have Ostrom. Can the theory of self-governing institutions be given a formal characterization in computational logic? That's what Pitt's saying. Can we encode it in computer programming? Can the computational logic be given an interpretation that can be used to implement a self-organizing electronic institution? So that would be like a DAO. But again, all of this is running on circuits and electricity, which is why you need the decentralized grid and the free market, right? Which is what RFK Jr. is promoting, the free market. Can the agents in a self-organizing electronic institution be designed according to the 8 principles to manage the resources? So Ostrom has all these rules about how to be a good agent in this social computation system. And they're talking about the importance of a decentralized community energy system. So yeah, so that's why we need to have the little smart villages. It's the 15-minute cities aren't just about that. They're about something more. They're about something computational. Here they're talking about human participants self-organizing and self-adapting. But there are emergent outcomes that may be undesirable. So in order to get a macro outcome, to bring this to scale, you can't just rely on individual human relationships. You need ICT-enabled algorithmic frameworks to do this at the macro scale, which is what they're really saying, is that they want to apply this to the entire world, that they want the world to be the game. The world is the commons, not just your little village. Your village will be networked into towns, into cities, into nations, into the entire world, into the noosphere. So they need the ICT sensing to do the coordination that's tied to the AI that would be linked into the circuit system of the smart contract logic. So here they talk about the meso layer ICT framework would be vital in delivering the desired outcomes. So yeah, that's the smart contract layer. It's this dynamic changing game board that evolves based on the data, and it evolves all of us in our behaviors in relation to it. And they talk about, open mustard seed, which is the digital identity that John Clippinger and Sandy Pentland developed in like 2013. And that if you have everyone with the digital identity, that you can develop continuity and stability and adaptability. So that's what you'll hear a lot about. And I knew it from early on with the social impact space and Global Impact Investment Network. They were always talking about resilience. And I just took it at face value what resilience was in the name of like climate catastrophe. But resilience is adaptability. And again, think about creative destruction. They'll throw something at people, a problem, a challenge, something that disrupts, perturbs the situation, and then they'll watch everything like readjust to fit in and readjust to a new homeostatic level. And that those shocks and then the readjustment, I mean, Naomi Klein, talked about that, the shock doctrine. There's a shock and then the readjustment. And in the readjustment, that's where you're unlocking the quote unquote like creative intellectual property. And so these shocks are going to be part of the system because it's what's needed for them to get the information, the solutions that they want, is they have to continually keep shocking the system. But then within the choice architecture of the game board, move it forward. So it's talking about holons here. And again, Michaela Uliru, she has her chapter on holons in the same book, that it says a common feature observable in most or all natural systems or similar scales and dynamics, such as living organisms, societies, or economies, is their reliance on holonic organizations. See chapter 11, Organic Governance Through the Logic of Holonic Systems by Michaela Uliru. First described by Arthur Koestler in the 60s, each system is both an element and an autonomous entity pursuing its own objectives and controlling its own resources, but also is an element nested within a higher level group and that's subject to this command and control. And Levin does talk about this, the nesting of cellular competencies on the way up. And I can see that. So here it's talking about algorithmic controls, like running your life on an algorithm in real time all the time. And if you engage, you have to keep engaging. And even he is in this chapter is saying that if you have to just essentially pay attention to all the data all the time to run your life, to adjust the algorithms, then you're going to actually have social stress and fatigue, because we're not built that way. Humans aren't built to be machines, and they're actually asking us to become extensions of machines or pals to machines. So here's the bio. Again, I've talked about Pitt already, but Ada Diaconescu, is an assistant professor in the Computing and Networks Department of Telecom Paris Tech. Her interests include autonomic and organic computing. Now, organic computing, I keep saying, the future of computing is going to look a lot more like biology. It's not what we think. It's not going to live in like a little box and look at you through a screen. It's going to be some other stuff. It's going to be more organic and fractal. It's going to be different. It's not going to be geometric. And so these self-organizing systems and service-oriented architectures. And then here it says that she was with Orange Labs. So I'm just going to play this quick clip. This is from Orange Labs, and it's talking about a smart key in a cyber-physical system. So what Pitt is talking about is programming society for problem solving, collective problem solving, including allocation of resources in the commons. That's the socio-technical side of things. The cyber-physical side of things, that is what the smart key is your actions as an agent in the game and your rights and privileges, what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do, your choice architecture based on the sensor network that's embedded in a real world environment. So let me, okay, this is a short one, but just, it goes kind of quickly. So sort of pay close attention to, and I would just say, when you see everything that looks like a convenience, like, oh, that's pretty cool. Look, all you have to do is wave your card. Think about the circumstances in which it doesn't work, or your access is denied as much as it's offered and granted. A world of virtual keys. A reality in which all you need is one key to park. There's a guy pulling in a park. He has a phone, a smartphone, and he's locking the phone. So to open the door in the parking garage. To rent one of these mobility scooters. To enter, again, to go into an elevator. To invite in, so to provide access to someone remotely. To share with others, that's the sharing economy and the circular economy. So it's a ride share. Auto pay, again, to overcome barriers. So that's lifting up in a parking lot, but it could stay down. Here's a woman in an urban park, and she's tapping on her app and interacting with the water in a fountain, and then it has all of this digital information flying around it. So there's a car, probably an electric vehicle on the roads with the LED lights, and we're sort of soaring above and seeing the whole world that's cyber-physical. One key to connect them all, right? And that's, I've been going through all these books in my house and clearing things out and organizing, and my family's sort of a fan of the Tolkien books. So, again, one key to connect them all, one ring to rule them all. That's sort of where we're at this point. But again, that Ada worked for Orange Labs. That's the epitome of the cyber-physical system. Okay, so I did include some things about modularity. I was going back and forth with Steffers a little bit because I felt like I've looked into Legos before, and this idea of modularity. Again, within the fractal and the nesting, you have units for complex problem solving. And I think in the world, a lot of what we're dealing with is that people only know what's inside their Lego. Like, they're in one little silo, and they don't know that their little Lego is going to snip next to this Lego to build that world, that cyber-physical world. They're only really just focused on the task that's in front of them that pays their salary, that they're occupied with. It might it might not even be that they do it for money, but it might be something that they love to do, but they don't realize how the modules fit together. But I think that, and that's on purpose, I think the modules are kept separately until at some point they're all going to come together and click together pretty quickly. But systems thinking requires some modularity. And in this, let's see, I'm just trying to think. She sent me a couple of articles and about working in modular systems and the evolutionary aspect of it. And I'm just trying to look at, this one is Evolutionary Tinkering versus Rational Engineering in the times of synthetic biology. And so I'm just skimming back over this. I'm trying to remember. I threw in so many articles recently. They're talking about synthetic biology, setting aside the question of evolutionary origin and focusing on the logical of the material properties. So looking at things as units. And towards the end, they talk about making things scalable and reusable. And that DNA will just be used like modularly, like biobricks. And they're sort of contesting this idea of purely modular material approaches to the world. I think that's the first thing. And then at the end, a lot of this is about signaling. We've been talking a lot about signaling today. Signaling in cells having to do with nutrients, hormones, toxins, pathogens. There's a lot coming into a cell. You need to like narrow the bandwidth so that you don't get too much information. And because the cell can't take in everything, and even our consciousness can't take everything. Our sensing mechanisms are narrow by design, because if we took in everything with the brain the size we have, it would be too much. So we have bandwidth, and they use these modules to organize the signals and to selectively transmit certain data through and to filter out harmful data, which it's interesting when you think about the whole signals intelligence and the idea of like erasing people off the internet, is that if there's something that's getting in the way of the system's progression, you just filter that out. And I think, when you talk about shadow banning, that would be filtering people out. Modules here, this is retroactivity in the context of modularly structured biomolecular systems. And they're talking about modules as networks of reactions and fitting together things in downstream ways, that there's information flowing downstream that changes the situation. But there's something called retroactivity where the downstream entity can actually affect the upstream entity, right? And so that's called retroactivity. And I think that's not desirable, right? If the program is to go towards the noosphere and we're all being hit with the narratives to drive us into the noosphere and to converge and to do this biodigital convergence, if we're pushing back on it as an upstream signal that might disrupt it, they don't like that. They call that retroactivity, and they try to tamp that down. But we're all sort of considered modules in how this practice goes. So I do want to touch a little bit on knowledge management, because I think that this idea of modularity, signal either amplification or suppression, is important. And Jeremy Pitt talks about knowledge management. This is a short one, so maybe I'll just play this one. But how important it is to manage knowledge. So if you understand that, quote unquote, information in a cell, it's semi-permeable. So some information gets in, some information doesn't. If it's perceived of as a threat, it doesn't get in. So imagine you're trying to explain things to people that are written down in academic papers, and you want to have a conversation with someone about it, but that literally nothing penetrates. Like nothing you're saying, they might nod, but then if you go back to them in 15 minutes, they won't remember anything that you said. I feel like that this semi-permeability is part of it, and then the fake news is also part of the signal processing erasure. It's the retroactivity. We want to push back anything that doesn't fit with the agenda as it's moving forward. So evidence-based and knowledge management is all kind of part of that. So here's Jeremy talking about managing knowledge and how important that was to the Athenian city-state. But I think from here, we can sort of substitute the Athenian city-state for the noetic convergence in this global superorganism.
Knowledge management is a key property of maintaining some form of democracy, if you like. That at least this is what my friend and colleague at Stanford University, Josiah Ober, wrote about classical Athens, was that they managed to sustain their democracy for so long, maintain their city-state in the way it was and outperform all the others on the peninsula at that time, was not because of this one person, one vote democracy thing. It's because they actually had particular methods of managing knowledge which allowed them to solve public action and collective action problems.
So again, think about biophysics here and cellular membrane permeability. It's all about information processing. So the cell, what they're saying is like, the cell doesn't want something in there that's going to damage the functioning of the cell. So there's a selectivity. And within the Athenian city-state, there might be ideas that would disrupt the stability of that cellular organism, that superorganism. And so that's not permitted in. I mean, you could apply that to a lot of different kinds of geopolitics, not just the Athenian city-state, but that's something that Pitt and Ober talk about often. But I would say normally you wouldn't think about democracy and biophysics in the same way of thinking about it, but I do believe that it's actually connected once we understand that it's at the fractal level, that all of these systems, all the systems and how they function and the information exchange, it's the same at all levels, whether it's just a teeny tiny cell or an entire society. So they're seeking control, but they're seeking control with the perception that you're participating, that you're an active, engaged citizen that is participating, and in your participation, you're you're preserving your world, which I guess is the case if you're a cell and you need to survive and you don't want some toxin to come in. But what does that mean if actually if we're imagining that democracy is about maintaining a status quo, and then increasingly that status quo is a world where humans are pals to AI and this parasitic relationship where we're performing our humanity collectively for machine computation for pattern recognition? Like, is that what democracy is? Like, I don't really think that that's what voting should be.
In ways which were better than anybody else could do it at the time. Knowledge management is a key property of maintaining some form of democracy, if you like.
So knowledge management is a key to maintaining democracy. Okay, so here's another clip. It's maybe a little bit longer. It's similar, but a little bit clearer about the fake news. So, and here he is at a Bitcoin gathering.
Now, it turns out that the keys to democracy, I always had this idea that, it was one person, I'm going to say it's one man, one vote, because they didn't have terribly enlightened ideas about women and slavery at the time. I'm sorry about that. But you go down to the agora, one man, one vote, and that's how decisions were taken. That wasn't it at all, or rather, that was the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that iceberg, they had these phenomenally sophisticated knowledge management processes, which actually were the things that created the successful decision-making. So the first one was this process of knowledge aggregation, where actually they had various systems which made sure that the right information got to the right people at the right time in order for them to make an informed decision. Having collectively made this...
I think he's talking about biology there. I really do. And it's important to note also that within the Bitcoin space, a lot of people are positing that it is a global superorganism. And actually the Institute for the Future blockchain map for 2017 to 2027 identified Bitcoin as an organism that could reproduce, that you would have like a plantoid and it would be run on Bitcoin and it would be paid, and it was like a sculpture that was made out of metal and it looked like a plant and it would do something or engage, and the people would give it tips in Bitcoin. And then when it got enough money, it would reproduce itself by using the money in its wallet to hire an artist to make a child for it, like a progeny. And so this idea of Bitcoin as an organism is already out there, pretty well established. And so to me, this superorganism, DAO, Bitcoin, what have you, it's the blending of a digital organizing layer with biological systems. So a machine computational system. Well, and we're already computational. I mean, that's the thing. We are, the first computers were women at Bell Labs who were doing all the hand calculations. I mean, and that's sort of a key point in the Cryptonomicon. It's people were the computers, not machines. The people were the computers. And like now we're looping back to the people are the computers. So anyway, I just want to point out that the Bitcoin context of it being a superorganism is important.
Informed decision. They hadn't had this process of knowledge alignment, which allowed people to know that, okay, this is what we're going to do. Yeah? So if the decision had been that we're all going to go and fight the Spartans, for example, then you're supposed to turn up with a sword and a shield. Yeah?
So I can imagine this being part of a smart contract, right? That you would have a voting, and maybe, you know, again, you have an AI because there's so much voting to be done that your AI digital twin votes for you. And then when a consensus, again, think consensus, Lubin, a consensus is reached with the tokens, and I do believe that sociocracy is central to this. Then there's an activation that happens, and then that activation triggers the next phase, right? Which is like show up with a sword, but that's not what we would do today. There would be something else that would happen, but it would be triggering a smart contract, A or B, like which course of action is taken, sort of like a choose your own adventure book. And so I think that the consensus mechanism, the sociocracy, the token exchange is a signal that's guiding the evolutionary process.
I mean, and so this was a credible commitment to actually participate in this. So they would know that this is what they would have to do. And underpinning all that, they had this process of knowledge codification. It was curious enough, the invention of language, particularly the invention of the vowel, that allowed people to write this kind of thing down in a way that it could persist. And so
again, codification, vows, that you're tied to agreements that you've made, and then persistence across time, that's the distributed ledger technology.
Then faced with a problem, a collective action problem of some kind, they could actually say, okay, well, this is what we need to do. Actually, these are the processes that we need to follow to actually implement a successful solution. It's all codified there. So they're able to leverage these things in the pursuit of not only making the right decision, but acting upon it to get the right result as well.
Okay, so that's, again, solving something in a collective social action problem. That's the human computation. Now, again, I want to reinforce that there's a game board. There are different levels of the game board, right? Different contours. I think some parts of the game board people will be allowed to participate in, just like we vote today. And does it really make that much of a difference? I mean, you can be the judge on that. But there will be a performative aspect of designing parts of the game, but they will probably be inconsequential parts. And then the larger structure will be outside of the purview of any common person, and it actually might be outside the purview of humans entirely. And to me, that feels like the unified ledger, the BIS unified ledger might be at the topmost layer, but that, and then the CBDCs or whatever, but what they'll hand the people will be these community currencies, community votes, token script, what have you, and then those will be the signals of the game. So anyway, I think I've talked about that for quite a bit. So we've got the modularity here. Just again, we've got Josiah Ober and David Sloan Wilson looking at, human energy. And we'll talk about that again. But, RFK Jr., you can be an energy entrepreneur of your own home or your own body, what have you. This human energy thing is pretty important. David Sloan Wilson is this human energy project is advancing the noosphere. The science of the noosphere is a project of human energy. We are investigating the scientific foundations of the noosphere to contribute to the third story, a story that points the direction towards a positive future for humanity and the earth. So third story, third pole, third way. So the human energy people talk about three stories of the universe. The first one is based on myth. The second is based on deterministic laws in a random universe and technological control. And then the third story combines the first and the second into the first story sense of purpose with the universalizable applications and laws of the second. And so I would say that the first one is that's where all of the Jungian archetypes fits in, and the game and the hero's journey into that myth and ritual. And again, imagine like what's coming with computation is going to be wearable, extended reality, Internet of Everything. So I do believe that at this point, we're humanizing the AI, right? We're having bio-inspired design, where we're supposed to have, all of this is for human flourishing. So we are we're not going to be just doing this sitting in front of screens. We're going to be performing humanity. And that's sort of in Neil Stephenson's book, The Diamond Age. One of the encounters towards the end is the bespoke engineer and his daughter end up on this ship in London in the Thames, this big boat, and it's a theater boat, and it's sort of like psychodrama. Actually, it's like immersive reality, interactive reality, that the game, you play the game and then it evolves you as a character, it involves your psyche, and you're doing it in collaboration with other people. So I think computing in the future is going to look a lot more like that than what I'm doing here today, talking to you through this little stupid window. But that's the third story, I think, that's coming. And let's see. Here, there are two programs. They have the global brain analysis and modeling brains. So again, looking at this, and the global brain analysis, it's looking at, let's see, to develop and apply neuroscientific tools to understand the formation and development of the noosphere. We employ complexity and information theory. So yeah, we're on the right track of what we're looking at. Utilizing nonlinear dynamical modeling to explore communication dynamics in human and neural networks. So again, I think the nonlinearity is important. And then in the modeling of brains, they're looking at predictive processing theory and global neuronal workspace theory relating to the noosphere. And it says the latter, so I guess that would be global neuronal workspace theater. They're talking about consciousness arising when messages in the brain are amplified and broadcast and reverberate in different parts of the brain. So I think that this broadcasting and oscillation is part of the organizing of the collective unconscious that they're trying to do at the global scale. And then the former theory, which is the predictive processing theory, is sense making or understanding happens when a bottom-up processing of incoming observations and a top-down prediction of what can be expected match and create coherent insight. And Francis Heiligen is working with the Human Energy Project. So that's pretty significant. And so here I just included, if people want to look at Heiligen's work, the Global Superorganism, an evolutionary cybernetic model for the emerging network society. And this was from 2007. So we're really behind the curve. I'm totally behind the curve. Heiligen's been on this track for a long time. But I'll play this clip with Wilson and Ober talking about the Athenian city-state. And I do think that this is important because a lot of, in the resistance, like on the conservative side of things, there's a lot of interest in the classics. We're like anti-woke. We don't like those woke people, but we really just like the classics. But people who are embracing the classics aren't really imagining that this is also part of the discussion of the classics. So here, we'll start. This is a little bit longer. It's about 3.5 minutes. So you've got the science of the noosphere with Josiah Ober and David Sloan Wilson. So yeah, so it says noosphere project is.
So, Josh, I'm so happy to be talking with you. We've already have a long print conversation and podcast on this topic. But so you are a Greek scholar, classic scholar, and political scientist, right? I've learned so much from you about this ancient Greece from for me, an evolutionary perspective. And this project centers about the concept of organism and society as an organism. And I wanted to ask you, I think, two.
So again, society as an organism, and that's the eusociality, which is E.O. Wilson.
Questions. One is the degree to which the Greek city-states were kind of an organism, and also how that was understood by the people at that time. The whole metaphor of society as an organism, of course, was present in people's minds, such as Aristotle and so on. So not only did the Greek city-states kind of qualify as an organism in ways that we'll get to, but also that's how people were thinking of it. So could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about a Greek city-state is first that these were indeed pretty tight collections of substantial numbers of individuals, anywhere from a few thousand to a few 100,000 individuals in a given city-state in an ecology of city-states.
So again, an ecology of city-states, so that would be like a superorganism.
So by the time we're at the age of Plato or Aristotle, there's something like 1,000 of these around the Mediterranean. And so in some ways, like the ant colonies that Deborah Gordon studies.
Yeah, the ant colonies that Deborah Gordon studies. So again, Quantum Heart Cafe recently did a guest post on emergence, and it was about exactly her work with ant colonies.
What we have is these individual groups which are cohesive. They act cohesively as, in some ways, quasi-organisms in an ecology of similar, as it were, quasi-organisms.
So I would say, too, if you understand how social media and digital media generally has been, over the past decade, really emotionally triggering, really polarizing, driving people into certain group identities, right? Like think about all the quizzes on Facebook, think about the social networking, is that they're actually creating these Holland and these groups, but the city-states aren't like the Athenian city-states in that they were part of a certain local geography. It's more ideological city-states, the city-state of your consciousness. And so people have been grouped and reinforced. I mean, think even about, all of the banners, that are put out, whatever the sloganeering are, like that's a reinforcing a group identity. And I think that those group identities are needed for the modularity of the human computation and the collective action, whatever, with collective resource problem solving, whatever, that in order to solve the problem, we need to have units, and the units need to have very clear identity, both you individually and then you as a part of a group. That group identity also has to be clear. And so the competencies and the attributes that are associated, we can get that through social networking, and then they can reinforce and prune. You can shadow ban people, you can bring people together. I've had so many really odd social exchanges precipitated through these digital platforms that are just, they really give me pause, because I don't feel like we actually understand what's going on there at all, and what it is to be human on these platforms, because a lot of the stuff is just not right. And I think it's not right because they're actually being used to group us in certain ways.
With which they both compete and cooperate. We have, I think, the key way of thinking about what goes on within the city-state as well as between city-states is the management of cooperation. So
again, I've mentioned this before, but cooperatives, in my piece on the refugee series, Mondragon Cooperatives are really central to what's coming. And at the time, I only was looking at it through a social impact finance lens. And they were talking about that they looked at the well-being metrics of people who were members of cooperatives, and they were higher. And so they were going to start to finance expansion of cooperatives to attach that to well-being metrics and then financialize that as derivatives products. But now I see that the cooperation aspect, especially platform cooperatives that are coming, is about group organizing towards collective problem solving. It's not just your business, but it's actually part of the human computation.
In the face of conflict.
Right, and so in strictly biological terms, what we have here is what would be called a metapopulation. We have a population of populations. You just said there were nearly 1,000.
Mm-hmm. So a meta population, right? Like we've got Facebook meta, right? Facebook has created a meta population of all these subpopulations underneath it. interest groups, people identified by their attributes, things they're interested in, and their interconnections to one another.
And that they're competing, they're in some sense replacing each other, and they're certainly trading information extensively, and they have a subsistence ecology. So it was very easy for me, with my ecological background, to appreciate what you were writing as, definitely a multi-level evolutionary process. Evolutionary change, including cultural change, could take place within any one of these polities, and did.
Yeah. And again, think about guided evolution, how things are being guided in extended reality in the cyber-physical system.
Including of the disruptive variety, and I think that we could focus on that, but also extensively taking place between these polities.
Yeah, so disruption. And again, think about Orange Lab, one key to rule them all, right? Every door that's open could be a door that is not open to you. All right, so that's this Athenian city-state, I think. Yeah, I didn't, okay. All right, so in guided evolution, I do want to mention, I'm not going to play this long one because it's, I made a compilation, it's about 15 minutes long. It's from a person on YouTube, Emergent Garden. And so he's developed an open source software system to do simulation modeling of evolution based in a two-dimensional pixelated space. So it's sort of like a Sugarscape, only more complex. And because it's open source, people can build new organisms, and there are encoded rules that are related to the pixels, like which is a mouth, which is an eye, which is food. And it's a cellular automata or automata. I never know which one it is, but based on like Conway's Game of Life. And so within the algorithmic rules of the game, these complex emergent systems come out. And I'm really convinced at this point that the protocol layer is inspired by the programming grids of the cellular automata. Like, I think that that's exactly what's going on. So, go back to the map, check that out. It's too long for me to play now, but I think this is at the core. And this is a clip that Leo and Jason and I talked about before. It's Juan Benet from Protocol Labs. I will play this one because it's pretty short, but it's talking about Web3 and why we need Web3 and digital human rights. And so this is something Jason, Brandy, and I talked about a little bit with Kerry Kennedy and the rise of the human rights movement. I think the human rights are essentially that narrative is going to be backed again into being an agent with rights that are attended to your digital wallet, is the human rights that are available to you as an agent in that particular part of the game. So here he's talking about at the end, like the need for an international utility to run the system. And I think that's sort of like the HAL 9000 where we're going with things. So, okay.
If you want the world to ratchet up into a better system, you have to make it drastically easier to use. You have to make it more convenient. Users will not select privacy. Users will not select security. Users will select convenience and fun. Oftentimes, people dismiss the requirements, but it's important that you think about your superpowers as riding on top of a massive scale international computing infrastructure
So that's the cyber-physical system, a massive scale international computing infrastructure. And we're all part of it. That's part of us being cyborgs, really, like that we are embedded into that structure that is built into the environment in the name of sustainability largely.
It's run by a set of corporations. So the application stack and the personal computing devices, those end up being manufactured and controlled by various different groups. There's probably a problem there in terms of the number of manufacturers for computing devices. We probably need a lot more groups to do that. However, it's extremely difficult. Now, the layers below are actually pretty good. When you think about the openness of the internet and the openness of the networks, that's working quite well. The problem sits below. The way that the internet is steered today is through a series of contracts, terms of services, and the action of various corporations and courts around the world. Those contracts can change very easily. Those courts can decide things in the future that are different from the past. So what we need to really upgrade our systems is to create a layer that won't change, that has hard requirements for change, that has a much stronger foundation. We want math, cryptography, and economics to underlie the structure of the internet.
So that's the cybernetics. And again, I think they don't want a lot of, I'm not sure he's saying that he doesn't want change. I do think that it is going to actually change in real time if they're going to use it computationally, because they need to be able to reset and reprogram the layers. But I think they want to be able to keep the data in the past because that's what they need for the pattern recognition.
To underlie the security of our communications network and to guarantee your future access to these communication systems. I think most of you have not.
So your future access means like essentially your tracking device, right? Like we've agreed, once we agree to have a digital wallet on the decentralized ledger system, is that a convenience or is that a jail sentence, right? We really need to think about that.
Been in a country that suddenly overnight disabled the internet, but more and more people every day are encountering that kind of experience, and it could happen anywhere. So these kinds of infrastructure improvements can lead to public, international, digital utilities.
So public, international, digital utilities, and those would be the digital public goods that we would be voting on with our tokens.
Think of them as corporations. Think of them as a utility that is there for the benefit of all, for the benefit of all of humanity, not run by any one group, but run by the math, by the cryptography, and by the economics behind them.
So that would be the commons, right? We're looking at a digital commons, and that would be run by this global digital utility.
Through that, we can establish these digital human rights. And from there, we should get them ratified. But I think we're in a moment where we should build them first, and ratify them second.
So again, that's the whole program, is that to push humanity forward, which is convergence, right? We enter into group mind and group mind with machine minds and other universal, human minds and animal minds or whatever, however they want to pretend that we're doing that. And that's this next phase of evolution, but it's embedded in the protocol layer as this utility. And I have a lot of questions about that. Okay, so that's the cellular automata. And again, John von Neumann, it started with him, and then the Conway's Game of Life came. And then we've got Perry Marshall. This is something I think Joseph Gonzalez had mentioned quite a long time ago, is this prize, this Evolution 2.0 prize that was put out in January of 2020. Perry Marshall is a business consultant, but he was working closely with very high-level scientists, including George Church. And essentially what they're trying to do is break down and understand the process of cell communication. So it is like encryption. It is about the cells. Let's see. So Perry Marshall, he's looking at sort of breaking down the bond between Darwin and creation, like finding some common ground. So George Church of Harvard and MIT is on the committee, Dennis Noble of Oxford, and Michael Ruse of Florida State. So those are the judges, and they would get $10 million for a patentable process, which is probably a drop in the bucket if they could actually do it. So it is this cellular communication. And I don't think it's just the genes. I think we spend too much time talking about DNA and genetic modification. I think there's a lot more going on with the crystalline nature of life in water and I'm just listening to this really fascinating book someone recommended about the spark in the machine, about Chinese medicine and acupuncture and qi, and that we're all piezoelectric, the fascia and collagen. And so, I think Western medicine just really doesn't have a clue largely that there's other ways that the body works than they understand. As far as I know, I don't think anyone has won this contest, but they're looking at how cells communicate, physical encoders, messaging, and decoders, and that it has to self-organize. So I feel like these are all things that are important in the signaling and automation. And again, Hawaii is sort of a center for all of that. So if we're talking about governing common pool resources, there's an aspect to that is a morality. And and morality is sort of like, again, if you're looking at a common problem action that Pitt is talking about, well, in a goal-oriented behavior, well, then we've got the sustainable development goals. So that's part of the game board, is getting us towards that area, and then working in collaboration, in collectivity. Let's see. So in here, this is going to be Levin talking about collective goal states. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the moral economy, because again, everything is about human flourishing. And this guy, Oliver Goodenough, he is connected to John Clippinger. Together they were connected to this law lab, which is looking at contract layers at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. And he's a law professor, but he's also interested in brain and neuroscience and morality, and he's affiliated with a law school in Vermont. He wrote a book, or edited a book, called The Moral Markets, The Critical Role of Values in the Economy, and it was a Princeton Press book in 2008. And for me, when I'm looking at morale, like a moral economy would be a token exchange that is meaningful for the AI. And so it turns out that Oliver's father, Ward Goodenough, was involved with naval research in Micronesia. So again, we're back to Polynesia again. He was an anthropologist and who spent his career at the University of Pennsylvania. And he developed a grammar of social relations. So think about that in the context of the Web3 smart contract layer, the protocol layer. Ward's father, so Oliver's grandfather, his name was Erwin Goodenough. Erwin Goodenough was a professor of biblical studies, specifically looking at the impact of Greek culture on Judaism. So that's pretty interesting, right? Especially if we're talking about the Greek city-states. So he was a well-known professor. Ward's brother was John, and he was a solid state physicist at UT Austin who specialized in magnetism, random access memory, and lithium batteries, and meteorology or metrology. I can't remember which one, but solid state physics. So again, you've got the physics part, you have the morality, you have the anthropology in Polynesia, you have physics and computing. And then there was a second marriage that Erwin had. And from that second marriage were two children, Ursula and Daniel. And Ursula Goodenough is a cell biologist. Okay, so we've got cells again, and was interested in spirituality and eukaryotic algae and lichen, which again is the blending of the two. So the spirituality of cell biology and algae and lichen. And then her brother David was a Harvard molecular biologist whose focus was on cellular communication and gap junctions, which Levin talks about as a way to insert false memories into the cells to get it to do what you want to do. So within this one Goodenough, right, and what a coded name, right, the Goodenough family, you've got smart contract, neuroscience, law, morality, anthropology, Polynesia, the Greek city-state, Judaism, cell biology, spirituality, eukaryotic systems, and molecular biology and cellular communication and gap junctions. And in this one like extended family, all of this stuff is happening. And then the wife of Oliver Goodenough is Allison Clarkson, who was the majority leader in the Vermont legislature. And you know, and there's a lot going, I mean, there's quite a number of significant things going on in crypto in Vermont. And for briefly, Brock Pierce was like floating a, I think, state Senate run or something there, even though he lives in Puerto Rico, which makes no sense. But the moral economy, I think the digital public goods and the tokens related to the moral economy have a lot to do with the smart contract layer. So I'm just going to play these couple of clips. Again, systems engineering. So the protocol layer would be like cells and tissues are like cells are to tissues as people are to social systems. So let me play this one quick. So this is Michael Levin and his whole work on embryology and morphogenesis and bioelectricity. This one's only a minute and a little bit.
Full stack model where that goes from the genetics of which ion channels are present. And so that's the genome, that's your hardware.
So I would say probably think about your genome also as being your competencies.
To the software that's implemented by the tissue-wide electrical dynamics that we can simulate using our...
So the tissue-wide electrical dynamics that you can simulate. So I think that's, again, that's a cyber-physical protocol layer at a social level.
Various simulators, all the way to large-scale representations that eventually get cashed out as basically algorithms.
So large-scale representations, earlier he was talking about this idea that in the planaria, it could hold two electrical patterns of what it was supposed to be biologically. One was a two-headed version and one was a one-headed version. It could hold both at the same time. And it would activate the two-headed one if it was injured. And so that's an organism that's represented as an energetic pattern. So I think what he's talking about is that you could take the basic material, you could simulate it, you could run it through an energetic protocol layer, and then you could firm it up, solidify it as a unit. And that's a planaria in that case, but it could also be a social system like a holon, and then you represent that algorithmically.
Or navigation policies that make it much easier to control the system than if you tried to do it bottom up this way. So for kind of, and I didn't show you some of our biomedical kinds of stories, but the idea is that what we want to do is complement the traditional bottom-up approaches that are all focused on the hardware with ways to, with top-down strategies that seek to take advantage of the software. And this has to do with literally behaviorally training cells and tissues. And
behaviorally training. So this is Skinnerism. This is like ultimate Skinnerism. Yeah, behaviorist training.
Including the pathways within them, and really understanding the decision-making of the material to...
Understanding the decision-making of the material, that's the choice theory in humans. That's we're the cells. And so that's the choice theory.
To have much more efficient control. And for this reason, I've argued that future medicine is going to look a lot more like a kind of somatic psychiatry than it's going to look like chemistry, because it's not about changing the physical landscape. It's about changing the tissue agent's perception of that landscape. And you can see more details on all this stuff is in these.
So that's interesting. So he's talking about somatic psychiatry. It's about changing your perception. So think about that in terms of the narratives, the narrative stuff that we're dealing with. And so this is another one. So this one is about collective problem solving. So I would say it's talking about different life forms and different levels of complexity and that they're nested. And so I think if you look at this and you think about it in terms of crystalline and prisms, that you have these little bits and they're nested within a bigger bit and they're nested within a bigger bit. And so I think that is in alignment with Melanie Swan's cloud mind program. And also the cellular competencies, like the little bits inside do a bit and then they inform the thing that they're inside, and then that thing informs the bigger thing, and it moves up.
Trying to put all of these very diverse agents, for example, collective tissues navigating morphospace, together with conventional agents on the same scale, is that you can come up with a central invariant, which I have picked as the spatiotemporal size of the largest goal you can pursue.
So and think about the largest goal you can pursue. So I think that's where the climate comes in, because that's probably the largest goal, right? Save the planet at that scale. That's the biggest scale there is, and that's the most complicated problem that there is. So by entering into the game of the Sustainable Development Goals, we are entering into this collective problem-solving space.
So all agents have in common one fundamental thing, which is that they pursue goals. And so now the question is...
So we pursue goals. So again, these are the goals, right? There's a reason that these are the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, it's almost like a target, like a rainbow target, like a photonic optic rainbow target. There's a goal that you're supposed to hit. So that's important.
Are you only interested in the local sugar concentration and you have a memory of a couple of minutes back and a predictive capacity of a couple of minutes forward, and then you might be a bacterium? Or do you have a bigger cognitive light cone and you might have a memory going backwards? And
I have to say, I think that the term cognitive light cone is interesting. I don't think he just came up with that idea, a cognitive light cone. I think there is something about light that's important.
Some predictive capacity going forwards, but you're never going to care about what happens in 3 months, 2 towns over. So you might be a dog if that's the case. Or you might be a human, which has a huge cognitive light cone, and you're active.
Humans have a huge cognitive light cone.
working towards world peace and what the financial markets are going to do 100 years from now. You could have a huge cognitive lycone. So this idea of, and we, of course, are a compound intelligence where our cells have little tiny light cones and our organs do, and so do we, and possibly larger structures in which we participate. So this idea of a cognitive light cone is based around the goals that any particular system can follow. And so that allows you to start thinking about what an individual actually is. What are cells? Given that we're all collective intelligences, we're made of parts. We're basically a bunch of cells in a trench coat. How does the collectivity and the unification happen? Well, let's look at the very early steps of embryogenesis. This is an embryonic blastoderm. There might be 50,000 cells here. And we look at that and we say, there's one embryo. What do we mean by one embryo? What are we counting? What is there one of? Well, what there's one of is alignment, not just physical alignment, although that's true too. Cells have to physically align with each other in planar polarity. But we are counting alignment of purpose. What we're saying is that under normal circumstances, all of these cells will work together to build exactly this thing. This whole blastoderm, all of them together have this one goal. And we know that because if we try to deviate, they will try to compensate. They are all together trying to get to this one goal. We're counting goals and alignment, and they have a particular size of this goal state that they're trying to get.
Okay, so goals and alignment. So think about that again, how we've experienced, those of you who are still on social media and me like mostly off or, limited. Like how are these systems aligning us into groups that are pursuing certain goals? And are we actually choosing the goals that we're engaged with? Or are they being chosen for us? So that's that piece. I have a couple of clips. Jason forwarded me this video. It's from an organization. It was actually Filecoin ecosystem, and they're allied with Protocol Labs. It's for a company called Topple, and it's social impact investment impact tokens. So, and Leo and I have been talking about the impact tokens for some time. Shanzai City is sort of leading. Or I don't know if they're leading, but they were some of the earliest use cases that I've come across in the impact tokens. So in a moral economy, right, and you've got goals, and your goals are related to value systems that are in alignment, right, towards a certain purpose, maybe a moral purpose, a higher purpose. And again, think about RFK Jr. and his camps and spiritual reawakening, spiritual realignment. That would be in alignment with the moral economy. Well, how would you keep track of all of that? Well, you would have an impact token that would be aligned to the goal. So that would be your KPI, and to keep everything steered in the right direction. So this is Topple speaking about how oh gosh, it's 8 minutes. I don't think I wanted something 8 minutes long. Let me see about the other one, if the other one's shorter. Oh yeah, this is just a couple. So here, I'll play this one. Here's about Topple and the social impact tokens.
This is what we have sought to do at Topple: create a market for impact, where impact is verified, quantified, and packaged into tokens, which can then be transacted on the blockchain. Tokens represent impact metrics and can be transacted to enable impact funding. But what frameworks can we use to create these new markets? There are many different approaches. At Topple, we've used the UN Sustainable Development Goals, globally recognized impact standards, to model our tokens. What we're looking to do with the impact token pilot is assess the market for impact tokens. Who are the primary buyers of impact tokens, and what drives the market demand for them? Second, how can impact be quantified across different SDGs? And how does this impact translate into a token's price? What kinds of token standards and data collection methods support maximum interoperability, both among blockchains and also across different use cases? Finally, individuals or institutions can then buy these tokens on a token exchange in order to invest in the impact projects and organizations that they represent. Think of it almost like a stock market for impact projects.
So again, a stock market, that's signals and betting. And think about Omidyar and eBay and values. So that's a coordinating mechanism. And if you link that to Juan Benet and Protocol Labs and the idea of a global utility tied to a smart contract layer, like that's increasingly being automated. And again, it's all towards goal-oriented behavior. So it's behaviorism, and I didn't know this when I first started out. I just really was dealing in the material aspects of the financial side of things. But Ideas 42, it's all about behavioral and social science, because ultimately, I feel like the grail is consciousness, is the collective unconscious, actually, and using the power of the mind, of which we only use a small part, towards some sort of computational function that we're going to be told is about sort of self-sacrifice to save the planet. But there's something else going on there.
Impact tokens really do have the power to revolutionize impact investing by increasing liquidity, democratizing impact investing, and aligning incentives.
Alignment. Remember, Michael Levin was talking about alignment in the embryo. Everything needs to be aligned.
The market is in its nascency at the moment, and there is much work to be done. However, once it becomes profitable to solve the climate crisis, once it becomes profitable to educate girls, to provide urban sanitation and so forth, there will be the necessary resources allocated to these noble initiatives.
Right. So as soon as there's money to be made, which is kind of sidestepping the fact that the problem was created because there was money to be made with a different incentive. But this isn't actually about creating... It's not just about creating businesses. It's about cybernetics. Okay. So we've got Topple tying in with the moral economy. And then, Pitt was talking about in one of his, he wrote a book. He kind of frames him. So his recent book is called Self-Organizing Multi-Agent Systems, Algorithmic Foundations of Cyber Anarcho-Socialism. Okay, so he imagines himself sort of an anarchist, like I guess a token engineering anarchist, and he actually has Escher, like these up and down staircases, is the cover of his book. And here's another article by him from last year, The Principles of Cyber Anarcho-Socialism. And again, socialism should be understood as eusociality. It's ants, wasps, termites, that kind of thing, which they're imagining as the next phase of evolution. So he has this anarchist leaning, and someone sent me, I think Natasha, this article, which was actually super helpful, and it's kind of crazy to me that it was in CNBC because it was a pretty extensive article and it had a lot in it. And the title of this article, which came out on Monday, August 7th, 2023, is Inside Prague's Institute of Crypto-Anarchy, where they're plotting to bring down the dollar. So it's talking about Prague and this gray building where they gather and to do their sort of free market, crypto, libertarian, save the world from the central bankers sort of thing. And as part of that, there's this Institute of Crypto-Anarchy. And again, this is more like anarcho-capitalist than, although I guess Pitts is anarcho-socialist, so it's whatever. But I guess the anarchy is sort of this idea of a choice state, right? Like things are sort of thrown open and then the system has to resituate itself. So they have this Institute of Crypto-Anarchy, and in the article from CNBC, it's talking about, this guy, Ligaki, he's an event producer, and they had these various events supported by the Czech Prince William Lobkowitz, and they had hosted this event, ETH Prague. So, we know about ETH Denver from Jason, but ETH Prague, I guess they're saying since the fallout with the crypto and everything, a lot of places are moving to Eastern Europe. So Prague is growing in prominence. The prince there who's supporting this effort, he was a nobleman from the house of Lobkowitz, but he's actually an American with Bohemian or Czech roots. And he grew up in Boston, but then moved back to Czechoslovakia in 1990 to claim his family's vast ancestral belongings, including like 10 castles. And it turns out he's actually married to a woman, Alexandra Florescu. And again, we've got a Flor, which is interesting. And she is the daughter of historian Radu Florescu, who belongs to one of Romania's oldest noble families. And again, Romania is kind of in the center of a lot of this stuff too. So he's working on, restoring his palaces, and some of that involves like selling NFTs. So here is his William, a different article by CNBC. I guess they must really like this guy. It's quite of a fairy tale. Bohemian noble family redefines modern aristocracy by selling NFTs to preserve and share a 700-year-old legacy. So they're talking about this whole castle that's like 3 miles from the crypto-anarchy space, and they're all like just hanging out together. Here's the Lobkowitzes. There's a Town and Country article, I think, with all sorts of fancy images of their castles. Here it says the Czech Republic's den of crypto-anarchy sets at the heart of, and my pronunciation is terrible, I'm sorry, Holsovice, district bound by the left bank of the Vltava River to the east and Lentna Hill to the west. The neighborhood was once the epicenter of industrial Prague, synonymous with slaughterhouses and steam mills, but today is home to art galleries and ateliers. At the opposite end of the city, in a district called Hradčany, about 3.5 miles southwest of Polis, is a 750,000 square foot castle complex that appears frozen in a Renaissance-era alternate dimension. Its imposing Gothic spires loom over the Czech capital, a vestige of a time when inherited nobility meant something quite different to the people of Prague. So the castles, and they're talking about here hosting big events for the Ethereum folks in the castles, but again, this is all framed as anarchist, right? But the anarchists are cozying up to the crypto aristocracy. And they're framing the Czech Republic as being like the freedom fighters because they went up against the Nazis and the Soviet Union, and now they're fighting the central bankers, and they're really savvy and they're sneaky and they know how to do it, and they're like this whole hacker culture. But at the same time, they're aligned with princes and going to fancy dinner parties. So they're franchises of this Polis program in Vienna, no shocker there, the center of token engineering. Barcelona, no shocker there because that's the center of smart cities, and 2 Slovak cities. And it says the Vienna branch goes so far as to describe itself as a living example of how the parallelny Polis crypto libertarian virus is spreading. And the crypto fans come to Prague. Ethereum, princes, anarchists, it's all quite the story that they're selling, but this idea of anarchy seems really central. And one of the presenters at the talk was this young man, Kai Landre, and he was talking about cyborgs. And he seems like kind of a quirky kid, and he didn't really fit in, and he decided to build an extended sensing mechanism that would allow him to hear photons, and so through like bone conduction into his skull. And so he developed this in concert with a cyborg outfit in Barcelona, this hackers conference. And it was quite an interesting talk. I'm not going to play it now because we're a little bit running out of time. But he did mention something I thought was quite interesting. The person who developed the idea, first used the idea of a cyborg, was Manfred Edward Kleins. And given that we've just looked into a lot of signals and frequency and acoustics and the masking threshold, Kleins was combining neurophysiology and music and math in a way that actually comes through in Cryptonomicon. That's one of the big storylines there. And the effect of music and emotion on the nervous system. And he had this system of like tapping and going through different kinds of emotions for emotional cleansing and health protocols. But he was the one who actually developed the idea of the cyborg. So I thought that was I wanted to bring this up because he was part of this anarcho crypto movement. The other piece that I wanted to bring up is that when I was looking at Prague and Bohemia, it's Wikipedia was talking about it as being a center for the Bohemian Reformation and the Hussite movement between 1402 and 1485. It was an initial challenge to papal authority and sort of the very early twinklings of the Protestant Reformation, pre-Martin Luther. And I guess, let's see, it says the Hussitism began during the long reign of Wenceslas IV, a period of papal schism and concomitant anarchy in the Holy Roman Empire. And so Jan Hus was a rector at the Charles University in Prague, and he was a reformer, and he was an anti-papist and wasn't a supporter of a hierarchy. He espoused the anti-papal and anti-hierarchical teachings of John Wycliffe, the morning star of the Reformation. And so John Wycliffe was connected to the Bible translations, the Wycliffe Bible translations. And ultimately, Jan Hus was burned at the stake as a heretic. But the reason this sort of jumped out to me was that so he was a scholastic theologian, and he advanced the idea of publishing the Bible in the vernacular, and that the word was the supreme authority with an emphasis on logic. So again, the logic is the protocol layer, and so a scholastic theologian emphasizing the word, which is sort of programming, and the logic of the word of the Bible. So the Wycliffe Bible translators were very influential in the middle of the 20th century, in the 1960s and 70s. And this guy, William Cameron Townsend, was a missionary. And he and Kenneth Lee Pike, who was a linguist, again, the word, the power of the word and the logic of the word, would actually worked with this jungle aviation group to clear remote airport, runways in the Amazon to fly in, probably with backing from the Rockefeller Foundation, to go in and collect indigenous languaging in the name of Bible translation. And so the Wycliffe Bible translators were trying to translate the Bible into every vernacular. But it was, to me, like, language is powerful. And so if you're using the Bible as an excuse to go and collect indigenous language and then use it, you've got this huge base of indigenous cosmology, which is really important to our conversation about indigeneity versus Western Enlightenment thinking, and that tension. And then after the Wycliffe Bible, it might even still be around. The spin out was this International Linguistics Center, which was in Dallas, which is backed by Trammell Crow, who has ties to Old Parkland, and also Nelson Bunker Hunt of the Hunt oil family that's behind Pegasus Park. So I just found the whole Bohemia connection interesting. And a while ago, Raul had started a series about Steiner. He actually had two pieces. One was centering on Steiner, and there was overlap with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then he had another one about the papacy and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I think that both of those series are paywalled, but very interesting connections to Bohemia, and also connections to the hill country of Texas and Austin. And I think Frank Molina, father of a rocket scientist and collaborator with Jack Parsons, he was Czech, and he grew up in the hill country. So there's this interesting connection between Bohemia and the hill country of Texas. And then we can sort of see, again, I'm thinking Jan Hus, moral economics, the logic of the Bible, and because I think the goal is to put the Bible on blockchain and install it into the protocol layer. So that might be a stretch, but that's sort of what I'm thinking. And the last bits over here at the top, I've mentioned crypto as an organism. There's been an interest in really pushing crypto on indigenous nations as a sovereignty measure. And there was an Aloha coin that was developed. I think it may be defunct by now, but it was advanced by this gentleman, Bumpy Kanahele, who was sort of a radical, in terms of radical nationalism of the indigenous Hawaiian people. And so he was sort of the face on this Aloha coin. And they were promoting that for a while. And again, promoting Hawaiian nationalism tied to crypto. And yeah, here's Bumpy Kanahele, a Hawaiian nationalist leader and titular head of the Principality of the Nation of Hawaii. And he was known for his militant activism, but starting in 2015, he was the face and advocate of Aloha Coin, wanting a digital currency for the native Hawaiian people. And of course, with the signals intelligence that you would want to, to get all of them on blockchain and trading in crypto. And I mentioned earlier the focus of, there's a lot of crypto going into a lot of islands in the Pacific. And I think it has to do with capturing cultural information through the token signals. There is an interest in cryptocurrency in Hawaii. I guess it's not advancing as fast as the crypto people would like, but there are 11 companies that have their own digital currency innovation lab that are pushing the state, lobbying the state to open markets for crypto. And in the aspect of indigeneity and digital currency, I want to point out early on in my research, I was looking at Brian Ford, who was in Peace Corps, did telecom in Nicaragua, then went on to fund the Bitcoin Developer Fund at MIT and the Digital Currency Initiative out of MIT Media Lab. Then he eventually left and ran for office in California. But his wife is Allison Greganis, and she is a lawyer who is focused on tribal law and gaming, and very connected into politics. She was a director of cabinet, senior director of cabinet affairs for the Obama White House, focusing on Native American teams, Native American. She was the Native American Affairs Team Point lead. And she had previously worked as a legislative assistant on policy agenda around Indian affairs. She was the staff attorney for a year for the National Indian Gaming Commission and part of a Anderson Indian law firm representing tribal government. So I think it's quite interesting if we consider crypto, Bitcoin as a superorganism in guided evolution, and with game mechanics, and the extent to which gambling and choice and statistics and statistical modeling is part of all of this cycle modeling that we have. The fact that indigenous communities across the nation, those were the centers of gambling, right? It's an interesting thing once you start thinking about the game theory of being applied. And then ultimately the gaming might be gaming our consciousness. And the ultimate gaming of consciousness by Western Enlightenment thinking would be to game the consciousness of the original people of the Americas. It feels like that to me. So I'm in the home stretch here. I'm just going to touch, if you're navigating these systems, I do want to mention the socio-technical systems, these social impact bonds. I've talked before about social prescribing, the idea that they want to manage your behavior for wellness and goodness, and to tell you to volunteer and to do a pottery class and to do things for your well-being. But this is a map that I did a while back of Michael Bloomberg and social impact finance and social prescribing. Again, he was tied to behavioral insights. They had programs for wellness in London, Healthy Years London, connected to the Harvard City Leadership, the Mayor's Challenge of What Works Government, creative councils also interested in art. And so they were partnered with the creative councils with Nesta, that's the Center for Impact Finance, and Francesca Bria of Barcelona came out of Nesta. And there was a project called People Powered Health that was part of this Healthy London partnership that centered social prescribing. That was a way of getting data for social impact bonds for health and social care. But there was a whole program linking Internet of Things tracked social prescribing with a project called Pitch In and connecting capability. So this is all of the cybernetics for the cyberphysical system that's coming through social prescription. And it's going to come not as disease, but as wellness. And here we have the Policy Innovation Research Unit at Imperial College, which is where Jeremy Pitt is over here. So we've got Nesta, Big Society Capital, which is Ronald Cohen. Up here, we have the social impact bonds, we have creativity, people-powered health and wellness, and Michael Bloomberg is centered in all of that. And of course, his background is in data analytics, major trustee for Johns Hopkins, that's a Center for Public Health, and helped develop with Microsoft, like one of the, early surveillance systems in the post 9/11, surveilling downtown Manhattan. So that's where the social prescribing fits in. Again, we have a guest post from the UK that was several months ago, back in the spring and April, but talking about these wellness programs called, the title is Blue Hexagons, Peak Diamonds, a guest post from the Oxfordshire UK corner of the Labyrinth. And so these are these wellness protocols, which all looks very nice until you start making the children wear smart shoes and tracking them. These are some images from that article about using smart technology for CrossFit, smart gyms, outside gyms, again, measuring your energy, thinking that we are going to be human energy, piezoelectric energy for these systems. There was a hopscotch communication branding company talking about social impact. This was all part of this Healthy New Towns program, which will be connected into probably 15-minute city stuff. But I would say it's not just about making money. It's about linking communities and the social bonds and the transactions, relational transactions in the creative space and the wellness space into this. And so this activity, some of these social impact bonds are around diabetes. We have the Pathfinder Diabetes Impact Bond. So they're setting all of this up, pitching the diabetes management bonds and pre-diabetics. This connects into Sweden and this health integrator app. It's part of the EIT health project in the EU, and essentially doing for the cost offset of unhealthy diets and low physical activity. And so they're putting the cost offset, and Sweden was the home base of that diabetes impact bond. But then there was another one in Israel. So there were partnerships with Social Finance Israel, which is, again, Ronald Cohen. So preventing, which means you maybe don't yet have diabetes, but you might. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this is a paper from 2008 where they're talking about electromagnetic fields, including dirty energy, can lead to environmental diabetes, right? So the frequencies we're being bathed in for extended reality can actually cause what they're calling type 3 diabetes, or due to electro-hypersensitivity, because they're running outside electrical systems through our tissues, right? That's what Michael Levin is talking about. And that's what the smart protocol layer with your digital identity in your phone will be doing to us, is bathing us in these frequencies that will give many, many more people diabetes, and then give us the opportunity to track us, our metabolism and our glucose levels with these wearable technologies. Now, Esther Dyson, she's the daughter of Freeman Dyson, who's the high-level physicist at the Institute for Advanced Studies. He's all into space colonization. I think he's since passed. She's also into space colonization. She's a Russophile. She's a venture capitalist investing in all sorts of technology. She was also, I think, maybe the founding member of ICANN, that assigns all the IP addresses to everything. And in this article, she's talking about the importance of self-awareness in health, and that even though she's a very skinny little person, that she, I know diabetes doesn't mean size, but she's not diabetic, but she's saying that actually she was looking for a continuous glucose monitor, and she thinks that everyone should be on a continuous glucose monitor because that's the metabolism that's coming. So again, here she is in the map. ICANN, futurist, and space colonization. And she has this whole program called Ways to Wellville. And that's the social prescribing. That's the preventative. That's the wellness. And so all of the health freedom fighters, who are all about preventative wellness, you're all going to be sucked into this. And the trick is that in these monitors, they need something that communicates the language of molecular language of cells to the electron language of electronics. And so Hanging Thief mentioned this in a comment that was really helpful, and Steffers directed me to this as well. This semi-synbio project, so it's semiconductors and synthetic biology, looking at molecular communication and memory to have these interior medical systems working. So these are microelectronic devices and how the information processing happens. But insulin is one of the ones that they're working on. So once you understand, and Steffers brought this to my attention, this covert body area network using human body communication, that they're talking about needing secure, in terms of not being hacked. Once we start wearing these devices and having electricity going through our systems and these electroceuticals, that we need protection. And they're talking about how to structure our, this energetic field around us so that we're not hacked through our biology. But so one of the programs, they're actually talking about radiation, which is again what gives you that the body will become like a wire. And this has been known for a very long time. Again, this is an article I've mentioned before from 2011, that DNA is a fractal antenna. So we are antenna. The body is an antenna. And, when we look at what Michael Levin is doing in terms of managing the electricity in our body, that's quite notable. So we're being bathed in things that are going to give us diabetes. And then in this semi-synbio roadmap, Steffers sent this to me. These are both from 2018. They're actually looking at bioelectric medicine or electroceuticals for various chronic illnesses, including diabetes. And here's an article, Closed Loop Bioelectronic Medicine for Diabetes Management. That's from 2020. And here's a diagram with the nerve interfaces and the decoding, encoding, recoding, working with your organs, how these cybernetic systems are going to happen. There's a bioelectronic medicine roadmap that's talking about that. And again, I just started listening to the book Spark in the Machine about Chinese medicine and Qi, but super interesting that now, again, Western medicine is like, thank you very much. We're going to repackage it and turn it into something else, turning it into bioelectronic medicine, and modulate your neurons and all sorts of other electrical aspects of your body. And this is the new medicine. But here is targeted diseases for bioelectronic medicine, and there's about 24 of them, but diabetes is right in there. Here we have a related report, semiconductor, the same year, 2018, Semiconductor Synthetic Biology Roadmap. Both of these reports were by Semiconductor Research Corporation, which is evidently a nonprofit, and in partnership with NIST. And they're looking at things like storing data in DNA. Now, I think that's artificial DNA, but I'm still not quite sure about if any of this is going to be biologically installed. Energy efficiency of using cell-based computing, biological cells, expanding intelligent sensor systems, automating it, and using biological pathways to fabricate new kinds of semiconductors. And this is something I think Sebs has talked about before, about the semiconductor industry and the shortage of semiconductors. Well, the plan is that hybrid bio-semicomputing systems. And they're doing this as the National Science Foundation, the Army Research Office, and Semiconductor Research. And they're bringing together people internationally from academia and biotech and governments to develop these hybrid biological semiconductor systems. And that's the semiconductor synthetic biology. So they want to build these hybrid systems. I've talked for a while about biohybrid computation, but this is where they're going. And again, diabetes is one of the targets for this. So convenient if you give a lot of people diabetes through their environment, through a toxic environment. And then they're looking at powering the wearables and the batteries with your own in vivo energy harvest off of your own glucose, really. And then bringing that to scale, and then having systems that are operating autonomously and with AI in your body, with the nanomachines and these hybrid biological tissues with nanoelectronics. So, Steffers has done so much work in the nanoelectronic space. But again, it's why, like, what are they doing in there? And I would say it doesn't just have to do with healthcare. It has to do with other aspects of steering us electrically. So they're talking about here biocompatibility, that, hey, you know what? It's actually kind of hard to get living cells to live on a silicon substrate. Like, it's kind of a hostile environment. So they have to work on that. They did say over here that one of the key challenges was hybrid biosemi-computing systems currently lack a well-defined interface between biological and electronic layers. So they don't really know how to do this. They're trying to figure out the translation. And maybe that's part of the Perry Marshall's communication strategy. Maybe they're trying to help build that interface. I don't know. They're looking at a new material base for future electronic hardware, novel materials that are sustainable, and that they could use cells to do that. And we can work on biosynthesis. And again, I said early on, like, I stand with the yeast. If they can repurpose the yeast to grow stuff that's really strange, like spider silk to use in ties or whatever, in yeast, if they can do that to yeast, they could do it to us. The participants in these projects included Ginkgo Bioworks, which I've talked about. And again, back in the day, Derek Brose was like, hey, it's not so bad. Like, having soy or cannabis with this stuff might not be such a problem, but it might. I don't know. He's always swinging back and forth. Could be a problem, maybe not a problem, right? Like, but again, what kind of freedom cell is he running? Twist Bioscience, they're connected to Berggruen, Autodesk, IBM, Intel, Merck, Microsoft, and Raytheon. So these are big players that are looking to build the bioelectronics. And here is the book that Daniel Keown, Keown, The Spark in the Machine, How the Science of Acupuncture Explains the Mysteries of Western Medicine. And, I think, Berggruen is very interested. Ben Goertzel, like, maybe the aspects of China aren't necessarily the super cutting edge technology, but maybe it's the really ancient Chinese medicine and understanding of qi and electromagnetism that's important. So just in closing, thinking about, again, Jeremy Pitt, cyberphysical, sociotechnical systems, based in these, smart villages, going back to Rand and Vietnam, and behavioral programming of people, propagandizing their mentality, the coordinating mechanism of quote unquote tokenized anarchy and how that's going to play into things, how morality is going to play into it. And again, especially for you guys, I know you're being propagandized pretty hard, conservative Christians, so they're going to definitely play the morality card on that. And I'm not saying to be immoral. I don't want to be immoral, but I'm very skeptical about something like coding a logic layer of religious practices into the smart contract layer. I just don't think that that's a good idea. And then you've got the social prescriptions, which are part of, the orchestration of society. And then you're going to have these wearables that will be the guidance system. And one of the big use cases here is diabetes and diabetes prevention. So you've got the finance silo propping that up. You've got, the nano machines. You've got the, glucose battery running your diabetes monitor. And, and Esther Dyson saying, hey, even if you don't have diabetes, like, you should definitely have a glucose monitor, because ultimately this is about metabolism monitoring. And then you've got the semi-syn bio roadmaps where they're trying to figure out how to get the biology to talk to the nanomachines, and converting molecular communication to electronic communication, and having the interface. And that's sort of where they're at now. So, this is one thing that I don't think, in one of the talks, Pitt talks about this Kula ring and in the economic system, and he's talking about the gift economy, which is interesting compared to, I think he wants to frame his cyber anarcho-socialism as the gift economy, but it isn't. It's going to be a platform economy on tokens with tokenized programming. And you might say that part of that is collective programming. But in it, he mentions the work of Bronislaw Malinkowski and the Kula ring, which is the creation of these ritual items that people would then travel great distances to present to other heads of, other kingdoms. And then they would translate the objects to the next place, to the next place. And that even though there was great risk involved in the open ocean trading, and these objects weren't particularly useful for anything but ritualized purposes, it knit communities together. So I think that, again, like Pitt has this connection to the Polynesian through this gift economy model that he's talking about, only what they're going to be coming up with is definitely not going to be a gift economy. So I know this is a bit all over the place, but it's, it started off with, I think Melanie had forwarded me this paper about the Maui JumpSmart Smart Community System. And, I think it's probably worthwhile to explore this topic beyond just the 15-minute city or what the origin of those fires might have been, but to really look at it in terms of different worldviews, indigenous versus technocratic, and then the way in which the indigenous communities are being harmed and then steered in the reaction to those harms, to then, I think, be further commodified into the protocol layer, because I think that it is the indigenous worldview that's very interesting to complexity and emergence, because the original peoples were people who understood right relationships, and that in and of itself is a systems thinking approach. So anyway, thanks for joining in, and I'll include a link to the map in the comment section so you can explore it yourself. All right, thanks everybody.